We'll call the meeting of the Minot City Council to order for today. It is Tuesday, January 18th, 2022, 5:30 in the afternoon. I want to thank everybody for coming out in the beautiful January weather to join us for this council meeting, and for those who are joining us online. If you would, go ahead and check your electronic devices to see if they are on vibrate or on silent so we can keep the distractions down to a minimum. Roll call, please.
Evans.
Here.
Janser.
Here.
Olson.
Here.
Pittner.
Here.
Padragula.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Sitma.
Here. Number 2 is Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Number 3 on our agenda this afternoon is the COVID report. We had originally had Lisa Clute listed, but as she is out of town on some medical leave, we have Roxanne Wenzel, who's the Director of Nursing from 1st District Health Unit, here with us for an update on the COVID numbers in our area. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here with you and present
Roxanne,
this.
could you double check to see if the little green light on the bottom part of your microphone is on down at the base?
There.
Chief is going to come over and give you a hand.
Thank you.
There we go.
See, Lisa is much more adept at this than I am. I'm happy to be able to present this on behalf of her today. She has prepared a written report for you. She has the 7-county area served by 1st District Health Unit has seen a significant increase in COVID cases, including in long-term care residents and staff. Currently in Ward County, we have 7 long-term care residents and 15 long-term care staff who have tested positive. Residents have a high vaccination rate, so that will help decrease the severity of illness that they may experience. As a result of these increasing cases, healthcare systems, emergency responders, and all other businesses are being challenged with staffing issues. We've seen an increase in testing requests. We provide testing at 1st District Monday through Friday to help take the pressure off of the medical providers so they can utilize their resources to provide care to the ill. At this time, we've increased our capacity to 300 tests per day at the Minot office, doing both PCR and rapid tests. Testing appointments can be made online at fdhu.org or by calling our office. Due to the increase in demand, we've also requested assistance from the state, which they will be coming up now to do testing at the auditorium on Saturdays and on holidays. This past Saturday, the 17th, they performed 327 PCR tests and 356 rapid tests. The rapid tests identified 118 positives for a positivity rate of 33% for that day. Weekend testing does not require an appointment, however, they do encourage you to register online. Public information regarding COVID is available on our Facebook page and website at fdhu.org. We continue to operate our call center as we have since the onset of the pandemic. Community members can call and our staff are available to answer questions that they may have. We're receiving a wide variety of calls regarding travel, recommendations and requirements, isolation and quarantine information, vaccine availability, close contact guidance, and just general information about COVID. The state has decreased their contact tracing and are now focusing mainly on the high-risk clientele. So those that have maybe just not household contacts, but just community close contacts, still have a lot of questions. So we're receiving a lot of calls to help field some of those. COVID vaccinations are available at all of our locations and are recommended for anybody over the age 5 and older. Flu vaccine is also available and recommended for anyone 6 months and older. We continue to do clinics Monday through Friday with extended evening hours on Wednesdays. Omicron has become the predominant variant across the United States, and we're seeing that in our communities as well. As of yesterday, Omicron was identified in over 90% of the PCR samples genosequenced at our state lab. Rapid tests are not able to identify these variants. Vaccination has proved to be one of the most important tools at preventing serious illness from COVID and is very effective at preventing hospitalization and death when given as recommended. It's important to stay healthy by eating right, exercising, taking care of our own mental health, practicing good hand hygiene, wearing a well-fitted mask, and avoiding large crowds. And of course, to follow the isolation and quarantine guidance if needed. If you're positive, you need to stay home for 5 days. If you have no symptoms or your symptoms are improving, which means you have no fever and you're starting to feel better, you can leave the house, but you need to continue to mask for an additional 5 days. Close contacts, which are up to date on their COVID vaccinations, meaning they've been boosted, need to wear a mask for 10 days, but they do not need to quarantine. They do need to test on day 5 after exposure to the positive case. If symptoms develop prior to day 5, they need to test then and then stay home until they receive their results. Close contacts that are not up to date on their COVID vaccinations or are not vaccinated, the recommendations are for them to stay home for 5 days. They need to mask when around others for an additional 5 days, test on day 5, and if they have symptoms prior to day 5, they need to test sooner and stay home. If anyone has any questions regarding their specific case or just questions in general, we encourage them to call First District Health Unit, and we'll be happy to assist them.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. I appreciate all the information, and be sure to pass on our appreciation to Ms. Clute
I will do
when
that.
she is back into town. Are there any questions that Roxanne might be able to field or potentially pass along to Ms. Clute for a follow-up? Appreciate you being here. Thank you. Number 4 on our agenda is the mayoral appointments. I do have one, that is Miranda Schuler, to replace Pam Karpenko on the Civil Service Commission with a term to expire December 2025. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move your appointment.
Motion by Alderman Janser to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Olson. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Seeing none, motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson. Yes. Pittner,
Yes.
Rajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Motion is approved, and just briefly before moving on here, is just notified that I may need to take a phone call sometime between 7 and 8 o'clock. If I do have to step out, Alderwoman Olson, President, would you please take over proceedings until I return?
Yes.
Thank you. Number 5 is the city manager's report.
I don't have a whole lot to report this evening. Again, there's a memo outlined in the council packet available to you and the public. Be happy to answer any questions. And if there is no questions, just to let you know that staff is beginning to gear up for the budget process again. And so we'll be working on putting together a calendar of dates and those kinds of things, which will include some interactions with the council, strategic planning, tours of the departments, those kinds of things. So be looking forward to communications from staff as we try to nail down the schedule for the budgeting process this fiscal year.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Any questions on his report or any other items of business? Thank you, Harold. That takes us to number 6. This is considered the report of the Planning Commission. They had a fairly short agenda, just one item, a public hearing. 6.1 is public hearing request on the application from Blake Nybakken, representing Blue on Broadway LLC and Northern Bottling Company owners, for an amendment to the planned unit development, that is the PUD overlay, to remove the restrictions to the first floor commercial comprising of the 30% of offices or small use. The application proposes expanding the overlay district to encompass a proposed parking area to provide 10 additional parking spots as part of the Blue on Broadway development. The legal description for the properties are lots 7 and 8, block 2, homeacres addition, less highway and street, and the south 60 feet of east, 120 feet of west, 150 feet of lot 3, block 2, city of Minot, Ward, North Dakota. The recommendations to the council was to approve the item in alignment with the Planning Commission recommendation. Again, this is a public hearing for anyone to come forward and speak either in favor, in opposition, or neutral to the recommendation before us. One more time, opportunity for anyone to come forward and speak on the item that is before us. Seeing none, what are the wishes of council?
Mr. Mayor,
Alderwoman Olson.
I move that we close the public hearing and approve the item following staff recommendations.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson to close the public hearing and to approve the recommendations as with the Planning Commission. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Seeing none, the motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Pachagula?
Yes. Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to the consent items. We had 16 different items for consideration on consent. I have not been notified of any single item that needs to be pulled
Blake
for
Nybakken.
consideration.
Is now exiting.
I think Blake was present in case we had some questions. We had 16 different items for consideration. All will be passed on the recommendations of staff. If any one item needs to be pulled for individual consideration, please let us know. If you want to just let us know which one we'll pull it, and then we'll take it individually. 7.12. 7.12? Okay, thank you. 7.12. Are there any other items that need to be pulled? Seeing none, what are the wishes of council?
Move approval on the remaining items.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson to approve all items except for 7.12 that will be taken individually. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Ross. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Motion is to approve all of the consent items, 7.1 through 7.11 and 7.13 through 7.16. Please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Pachagula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. The 7.12 is the final payment of the cargo apron construction Phase 2. In 2021, the Bluestone Construction began construction on the cargo apron Phase 2 project at the Monett International Airport. City Council approved the project in April 2021 and now has been completed. The recommendation to Council is to approve the final payment of the amount of $117,721.61 to be paid to Bluestone Construction. Ms. Ekman, if you want to come forward and speak on the item prior to taking the motion, as it was pulled.
Thank you, Mayor Sitma. I was informed during my staff meeting that ended at 4:30 this afternoon that there are some punch list items that may not be fully completed on this project, and therefore I'm asking that we postpone the approval of this item until next City Council meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Ekman. In light of that, do we need a motion to postpone, or do we just pull the item?
Let's do a motion to postpone.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to postpone item 7.12 until our next meeting.
I'll second.
Motion to postpone on 7:12 until our next meeting by Alderwoman Evans, second by Alderman Patagula. Any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Ross.
Is that enough time?
I'll verify that the project is complete or if these are actual punch list items that needed to be completed by this time. But one of my staff members said that there was some areas of the ramp that needed a few things done to it, and I was not aware of that when this came through to my desk.
So I'm just wondering, with weather and everything, if it's
I'll
best
amend
to
my
maybe
motion.
postpone it until the airport director brings it back.
I would look to the motion maker.
I will do that. So we'll change that motion to postponing it until airport director brings it back to the city manager to put on the agenda.
Does the second agree? Okay. Any discussion on the motion as amended? Okay. Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Motion is to postpone until the airport director does bring back to city manager for council approval. Please call the roll.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Pachagula?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion is approved. That is the end of our consent items. That takes us to our action items section. 8.1 has been pulled until a later date. That takes us to 8.2. This is the 4600 2022 Traffic Signal Improvement Project. In 2012, the engineering department conducted a traffic signal pole inspection report that documented the condition of 112 traffic signal poles throughout the city of Minot. An initial round of traffic standard replacement was completed in 2014, followed by a second round in 2020 to 2021. The 2022 signal improvement project will continue addressing the deficient signal pole situation at the intersection of 16th Street Southwest and 16th Avenue Southwest. The two recommendations to the full City Council is to award the bid of the construction portion of the 2022 signal improvement project to the low bid, Main Electric Construction, Inc., in the amount of $305,575, and to authorize the mayor to sign the agreement.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Janser to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Olson. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Seeing none, the motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Rajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 8.3, approve the CDBG NDR Substantial Amendment Number 7. Substantial Amendment Number 7 proposes funding allocations adjustments specifically to increase the amount allocated to the City Hall project and family homeless shelter projects. The recommendation to the council is to approve the CDBG NDR Substantial Amendment Number 7, authorizing submission to HUD following a public comment period.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson to approve. Is there a second? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion to approve. Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Seeing none, the motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Rajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 8.4. This is 16th Street Southwest and 37th Avenue Southwest Cost Participation and Maintenance Agreement. This is CPM 4592. 16th Street Southwest and 37th Avenue Southwest have been scheduled for a thin lift mill and overlay through the NDDOT urban road programs. The CPM agreement is the standard agreement generated by the NDDOT to dedicate federal funds to the city to pay for the federal share of the project. The recommendations to the full council are to approve the CPM agreement with the North Dakota Department of Transportation, also known as NDDOT, and to recommend the council authorize the mayor to sign the agreement.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Pittner, second by Alderman Janser to approve. Is there any comment on the motions? On the motion? Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Seeing none, the motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Rajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yep.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 8.4 is approved design and construction of a new well in the Sundre Aquifer. This is the point 4681. During the period of drought, we have seen our water demands increase and put a demand on our existing well system. In 2021, we are under severe water restrictions due to wells going down and loss of raw water capacity for treatment. We are requesting permission to design, drill, and construct a new well in the Sundre Aquifer for additional capacity. There are 4 recommendations to the council. The first is for the approval of the Public Works Director to negotiate agreement with Houston Engineering for design, bidding, and construction services for a new well in the Sundre Aquifer. 2, authorize the use of NAWS sales tax dollars for funding the new well. 3, authorize the mayor to sign the contract. And 4, approve the attached budget amendment for the engineering services.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson to approve. Is there a second? Second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Just a brief comment on my side. I want to thank Dan for working with the state officials on and the Public Works Department working through this with our state official partners to get this project, I think, identified as a NAWS use component as the water needs continue to rise as more of the project is complete before the biota plant is finished down south of us until we start drawing Missouri River water. So job well done. Appreciate it. Any further discussion? Seeing none, the motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Rajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 8.6, approve a business incentive agreement with the LPN 1 LLC regarding the Minot Intermodal Port. Having an operational Intermodal Port allows the rail access for loading of local goods such as crops, minerals, and manufactured products. Gives the Minot region and the state of North Dakota significant economic development competitive advantage. Rail access is high demand, but difficult to create due to the railroad company requirements, policies, and costs. The current efforts of MAC EDC to secure the operator for the port for the foreseeable future is certainly important to the economic makeup of Minot. The recommendations to the council is recommend the city council approve a business incentive agreement known as a BIA with LPNND 1 LLC, which is MAC EDC, which establishes the purchase of the land from the city as outlined in the current lease and implements a forgivable loan in exchange for created jobs and full-time operations of the intermodal port. Prior to a motion, I'm going to look to our city manager for some background and recommendation.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, Council. Before we got too far into this, I wanted to just kind of, as I've done previously on some other actions for consideration by the council, I just want to provide some background and best practices with regards to this item that you're talking about this evening, especially with regards to economic development. We've never really talked a whole lot about business incentive agreements. When are they appropriate? What's the best process to go through? And what's the best things to incorporate into a business incentive agreement? And so, again, tonight we have a presentation prepared just to talk about business incentives in general that I think will be helpful and foundational to you and the public as you move forward with your conversation with regards to the business incentive agreement that is on your docket for consideration this evening. So what is a business incentive agreement? It's a public-private business agreement that uses public funds to incentivize local ventures. In essence, in so long as the investment creates some public benefit or good to the public, it is appropriate in certain circumstances to use public funds that are paid for by the taxpayers to help make sure that that happens and give it a chance of success within your community. These are designed to spur economic growth and innovation, but they have some caveats to them. Often when these are appropriate to use and how are often outlined in state law, which is also true for the state of North Dakota. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a couple slides. But at the end of the day, it must meet the best interests of the public. So again, when is public money used to benefit a private investment? When is that okay to use? One, if it abides by state law. Two, it serves the public first, and it can improve the economic standing. In essence, you want to make sure whatever your return on investment either meets, is equal to, or exceeds the investment of the public, and that there is some public benefit back. It doesn't just benefit the business specifically, but there's some public good accomplished in return for that investment back to the public. So what are the state requirements? First, there has to be a description of the business incentive with the value of that business incentive. You have to state the public purpose that incentive is going to meet. What are the goals of the business incentive, whether that's jobs created, earnings, private investment, how long that benefit is expected to remain in place underneath the terms of the agreement. Description of the financial obligation of the recipient if the goals are not met. In other words, they come in, they make promises, that's outlined in the business incentive agreement, they'll create so many jobs, et cetera. So what happens if they don't meet those goals and those objectives? Oftentimes, and that's often referred to as clawbacks. What is the clawbacks? What's the accountability on behalf of the public? That if the private side doesn't meet their obligation, that the public receives back and benefit for that. The commitment by recipient to operate in jurisdiction for no less than 5 years. In other words, if the city is going to approve a business incentive agreement, we cannot approve an agreement for any less than 5 years. That's the minimum threshold. Has to have the name and the address of the parent company. List all financial assistance by all grantors of the project. We want to make sure that nobody's double dipping, that they need $2 million and they get $1 million from us and $1 million from 3 other parties, and then they have $4 million in the bank, and when all they really needed was $2 million to make that work. The obligation of the recipient if the BIA is not fulfilled. So those are the requirements of state law. just to meet the state law requirements. Now, I'm going to transition a little bit here into some of the best practices that I've observed over my career, and these are typically the elements that are incorporated into a business incentive agreement or an incentive agreement using public funds. And not everyone refers to it as a business incentive agreement, depends on the state and the terms and those types of things. But in essence, often what's common is some combination of these three things. First is job creation. And in part of that job creation, it's what are the wages being paid? What are the benefits being associated with that? And then you have primary job creation and secondary job creation. So as you create the initial job, that translates into additional economic prosperity within your community that may transition into other things. So you bring in a manufacturer, that may increase your population, which then results in maybe you have more need for retail and fast food within your community. That would be considered a secondary job creation. And we have algorithms and methodologies for estimating these and creating these types of things that all go into the analysis of a business incentive agreement and what its economic impacts are on the community as you try to assess what is the public return on investment. The next would be the term balances of the public investment. So how long of a time period is that held into effect? And then obviously the longer that you have the agreement for, the more economic return on investment for the community. And those vary depending on the amount being invested by the public, the amount being invested by the private sector, the number of jobs being created, et cetera. And the term of the agreement. Longer is better, typically. And ensures accountability. So we have, again, the clawbacks in there that if, for whatever reason, that things don't go as envisioned and as planned, what does that mean? How is that worked through from a legal perspective? Are they required to pay things back? Are they required to pay the full amount back? Are they only required to pay partial back? Those types of things. All that should be clearly outlined in your business incentive agreement going forward. I would also say that this makes the negotiation process very important because it's easier to have these conversations and outline all this up front than after the money's already been given and now we have a dispute of whether or not they met the requirements or not, and often can potentially end up in legal battles as far as if the accountability isn't clearly outlined, then you get into a legal battle of who's interpreting it correctly. And so the clearer you can lay that out up front, the better. So let's talk a little bit about process. First check is to make sure that it meets state law within the business incentive agreement. It's also recommended that a cost-benefit analysis is completed. As I referred to earlier, there are algorithms and methodologies for doing this. In fact, you have included in your packet both a 5-year and a 10-year cost-benefit analysis. We partnered with MACDC, who then partnered with the State Department of Commerce, who has access to some software that helps us do this and can help calculate out what the economic impact is based off of North Dakota data. It's important that the data be accurate to help you go through these analyses. But in essence, in particular with the agreement you have this evening, the agreement outlines how many jobs need to be created per year. Those are the primary jobs, what the wages are going to be for that. That's all data that we input into the cost-benefit analysis and make sure that the return on investment meets or exceeds the investment the public is making. So cost-benefit analysis, again, was required as part of tonight's. And then that it meets all requirements that we went over in the previous slides. In other words, that mix of job creation, private investment, length of term, all those kinds of things that all come together to make the best practice of a business incentive agreement going forward. Regardless of the action the council takes this evening, I would encourage us to enter into some dialogue as far as what is the minimum standard that is appropriate for Minot. Again, probably the key example here some of the element that will be part of the discussion this evening is whether or not this business incentive agreement should be for a 5-year or a 10-year term. Legally speaking, by state law, as long as it's at least 5 years, it meets the state law requirements. But does that mean that all agreements should only be for a 5-year period, or are there circumstances which we want to require a longer period of time? And does that ebb and flow? So, for example, if you're creating more jobs and contributing more private investment up front, does that translate into a shorter period of time of commitment on behalf of the city? Or should that be longer? And it would be helpful for staff as we enter into negotiation of these standards to have some better direction from the council of what is appropriate for the city of Minot and the community of Minot as we move forward to make sure that we get the best return on investment possible on behalf of the taxpayers of our community if we're investing taxpayer dollars into these incentives going forward. So with that, that's a very quick, brief overview of business incentive agreements in general. Is there any questions or follow-up with regards to the general practice of business incentive agreements before we delve into the specifics of what's on the agenda for consideration this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Any questions at this time for Harold on any of what he had presented or on any of the exhibits that were presented for consideration? Alderwoman Evans.
Harold, could you walk us through because like you said, it's the 5-10 year thing that's really the point we can't sort of seem eye on. Can you walk us through the two exhibits with the 10-year versus 5-year, and, based on your economic development background, what, for the city and the taxpayers of Minot, your recommendation would be?
Sure. So I guess getting into this agreement specifically, city staff and the mayor have been working cooperatively with MACDC and their representatives here for the last several months as we've tried to work through an agreement that works on behalf of the public, but also meets minimum requirements going forward. I will say that this agreement is a little bit different because we're not starting from scratch. We have previous leases and agreements in place. We have multiple partners with multiple banks, the city who owns the property. So we're not starting from scratch, which makes this a bit more difficult to work through. But that being said, and I want to start this off with a caveat too on 2 points. One is I do think it is appropriate for the city to participate in a business incentive agreement with the port. And so I don't want anything that I say tonight to be misconstrued as that I'm unsupportive of the city entering into an agreement. I think that the port is critical to the economic vitality of our community and our region going forward. And I think it is appropriate to have some investment of public funds in this, as well as the state just in their last legislative session invested $2 million in some of the infrastructure out here. And so I think it is a worthwhile investment. 2 is I don't want anything that I say tonight to be misconstrued as though MACDC is bad partners with us. And just because we're always striving to be good partners doesn't necessarily mean that we see eye to eye or we agree on every point. And ultimately, that's kind of what this comes down to this evening. Again, in my opinion, and based off of my experience, business incentive agreements have some guarantees back to the public to make sure that it's guaranteed as much as we can that our investment will return something greater back to the public on its behalf. And again, that's a combination of the jobs being created, the amount of private investment in there, and then the length of time. So in this agreement specifically, we have a purchase option within the existing lease that sets the amount that the city would then sell this property to. So there wasn't a lot of negotiation about the price point because that had already been negotiated by previous council and administration with the current leasee of this facility. So we didn't spend a lot of time negotiating that. The question is how do we transition ownership of this property to MACDC in a way that fits with their plans going forward? And the best way to do that was a forgivable loan through a business incentive agreement. There is some guarantee of and commitment of jobs created that are outlined within the agreement. But one of the things that is absent in here for me that was a significant factor for me is typically you're going to have some guarantee by the private sector of an investment of private sector funds. There is no guarantee of investment of private sector funds in here. There is the commitment from MACDC of $500,000 in cash at closing towards the purchase price, but there is no guarantee from the operator or anyone else that they're investing $10 million in the improvement of the port. That isn't to say that they aren't doing that. What's being said here is that that isn't outlined as a legal obligation within the business incentive agreement of the city in cooperation with the investment of public funds. The other factor that I consider in here to be very important is the importance of the success of the port to our economy for the future. So the longer we can lock that down, the better it is for our community. And I just thought that 5 years was a little light for that. And so I thought 10 years was better. Now, that being said, my job is to give you a professional recommendation based off of my experience. You as a council can taper that to whatever is appropriate for Minot. So again, a 5-year agreement is legal. It meets state minimum. As you look at the cost benefit analyses that are included in the packet this evening, it does break even or exceed a little bit more than the investment the public is making. But in my professional opinion, with a longer period of time, you can guarantee more return on investment for the public and the taxpayers of the community by approving a 10-year agreement as opposed to a 5-year agreement, and that's what I base my recommendation off of this evening. In addition, I believe the city has entered into previous agreements that were longer than a 5-year period. One example would be the recent facade improvement grant program that we implemented. And while that isn't tied to a business incentive agreement specifically, we do have a use of taxpayer funds to benefit property owners downtown up to $100,000, not to exceed $100,000, but up to $100,000, which requires 10 years of compliance. And I just had a hard time justifying that we're going to require participants within the facade improvement program downtown to meet requirements for 10 years. But here we're going to give substantially more money only for a 5-year period. So at the end of the day, those were the factors that I considered into my recommendations to the council and to the community. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I will make another point of clarification here too, that once the council gets to a point of motions and decisions, the two actions we need on behalf of the council this evening is a motion to approve a business incentive agreement, and you guys need to decide whether that'll be a 5-year or a 10-year agreement. In addition, there is also included right after the exhibits and the attachments, there is the LPND1 lease amendment, which is separate from the business incentive agreement, that if the council chooses to agree to the language negotiated with MACDC that provides a relaxation of the first right of refusal, we will need a separate motion for approval of that lease amendment conditional upon LPND1 receiving assignment from the current holder of the 2009 lease. So anyway, Alderwoman Evans, did I answer your question, or is there any other questions or follow-up with regards to my recommendations this evening?
That's very helpful. Thank you, Merrill.
Alderman Janser.
I have a question, and I guess for the city manager probably. So does it have to be 5 years or 10 years? Or could it be some number compromise in between, 7 or 8 or some other number? Did you discuss that in your negotiations at all?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, yes, there was some conversation. At the end of the day, the minimum that you can't go below is the 5 years. Anything above that is subject to negotiation between MACDC and the city, whatever you guys feel is appropriate on behalf of the community of Minot in exchange for the investment of these public dollars. So whether that's 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever you feel that to be appropriate is up to you. I guess the best way to simplify this down is what is the return on investment? If you invest $100 and the minimum requirement is that you get at least $5 back, so you get $105 back, do you keep it at that? Or if you can make 120 or you can double your money, should we not go for that investment that generates more return on investment? But ultimately, I guess what we're saying is staff recommends the 10-year. You know, in my opinion, I very easily could have recommended a 15 or 20-year, which would probably be more in line and more in common with some of the agreements I've negotiated in previous communities and states. But I also understand the complexity of what we have here and what's going on, and I think 10 is fair and reasonable on behalf of the community. But ultimately, it's up to the council of what length of period you want to negotiate that for. MACDC has been very adamant on a 5-year, and I believe their board has taken some action to hold to that recommendation, but I'll leave it to them to explain why they feel that's appropriate.
Thank you.
Any other questions for our city manager at this time? Any other questions, I think, for our folks from MAC-EDC at this time? Alderwoman Evans.
Can Mr. McMartin or whoever is going to speak to this, I just have a.
We'll have our executive director from MAC-EDC step forward here.
Hello.
Good evening, council and mayor. Harold.
Alderwoman Evans.
So we've heard sort of Harold's point about 10 years. Help me understand where you all are coming from with 5 years and why that would be not just a better alternative for you all, but for the council as stewards of public money.
And thank you for the question, Alderwoman Evans, and Mayor. I've got some prepared remarks, if you'll let me just, and you have our letter. I don't intend to read the entire letter to you, but I am going to highlight some of the points and perhaps elaborate a little bit more on others. Harold did mention that the board felt very strongly about this. And in fact, it was a unanimous vote by the board that they felt that 5 years made sense. And the board members are listed on the letter. The 5-year meets, as Harold has pointed out, the statutory requirements, and it exceeds several business agreements offered by the city of Minot in recent history. I appreciate the fact that the facade program is a 10-year requirement, but the facade program is to maintain the facade for 10 years. It's not tied to what the employment is going to be 10 years hence, or what the return on investment is going to be 10 years hence. This is comparable, the 5 years is comparable or more stringent than many of the past business incentives. And it keeps us in line with other cities in the state of North Dakota. And I make that point that if we're talking a major petrochemical plant in Williston, or we're talking a major fertilizer plant in Grand Forks that are going to be investing hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, and require local incentives, state incentives, and whatever other incentive those plants are looking for, would we suggest that a longer business incentive agreement other than 5 years makes sense? You bet it does. In something like one of those where there's a significant amount more. Mother Nature, with drought, cold, snow, and more recently the supply chain, have all factored into making the type of business that's out there on the port a little bit more volatile. The chamber stepped into voluntarily trying to solve the problem or the ongoing problems with the past agreements between the city and the port services. We've been doing that since 2018. And I think the fact that when we put together the contracts with the city, that we felt it was important enough that that it was put into our development agreement, And we agree with Harold's comment that its success is vital to the improvement and growth of the economy in Minot throughout the region and the state. We've talked about the grant funding. We secured the grant funding to construct the original intermodal site. And we have interest in the site and rail assets that would be purchased from the city of Minot. The Chamber EDC board members have volunteered thousands of hours and significant funding to secure the future of the Minot intermodal facility. We took over the project again after the foreclosure and bankruptcy and worked diligently to find a way to make it work. Voluntarily, we've paid property taxes and for the last 2 years, and beginning in the early 2020s, we transferred improvements on the land back then to the city at zero cost to the city. The Chamber EDC is assuming significant financial risk to secure the future of intermodal services, and that's one of the reasons LPND1 was established, and that's the entity that's going to be acquiring the mortgage from the banks. The Chamber also has built a network of support for intermodal services here. There's a listing of those in the letter. I'm not going to reread them, and you've got 2 letters from 2 of our partners that I handed out earlier this evening. We take great pride in working with the City of Minot to improve the economic resilience in our region. We do not feel that the request we are making to the City Council is unreasonable. Without the EDC, the economic benefits associated with the intermodal service would not be a current possibility for Minot. So at the end of, if you all had individual businesses, and there are several businessmen on the council, and I'm not trying to draw any distinction there, but if you were sitting there trying to make decisions on how many employees you're going to have in 5 years, that crystal ball might be a little clear. But if you're trying to make the decision on how many employees you're going to have at the end of 10 years, that crystal ball gets a little harder. And as much as we're talking about jobs, and we have to talk about jobs because that's what state law talks about for the business incentive agreement, please don't hit me when I say it's not about the jobs, it's not about the jobs, it's not about the jobs. It's about the economic benefit the region is going to get from those containers being filled and taking product to the coast. Yeah, do we need jobs? Yes. And Alderwoman Evans, to your question, the 5-year economic analysis said 4.57 million annually in wages and salaries are generated, and 6.67 million in disposable income. Now, and that's the 6-year average that was run on REMI. Is it slightly higher in the 10-year? Yes. But we would respectfully point out that for the 1.568 million, that is I think a reasonable return over the 5 years. Over $4 million in wages, direct and indirect, over that time frame. More importantly, and again, I've said, depending upon the project, perhaps a longer term makes sense. But for some of the smaller projects, we don't think 5 years makes sense, but not longer. And if we go longer than 5 years on a lot of them, it's going to make us, we feel, it's going to make us much less competitive with the other communities around the state. When a business looks at, we respond to RFPs and everybody wants to know what are the restrictions and what are we getting into. We put in, we're going to have a 10-year business incentive agreement, and every other respondent in North Dakota puts down 5. We're going to have a hard time recruiting some businesses. I'm not going to say all, but some. And everything that we think that puts hindrance in the way becomes problematic. I'll stop there, and if there are other questions, I'll try to answer those.
Alderwoman Evans, did you have a follow-up?
Not at this time.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. McMartin? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. John, as far as the operator that you guys have in place out there, has he weighed in on 5 versus 10-year?
He has suggested to us that he would prefer the 5-year. It certainly makes it more tenable for him. You know, he's trying to weave the way through all of the things that he's got to negotiate on our end that we don't.
Okay.
You know, he's got rates from the shipping companies, rates from BNSF, and all of those sorts of things. So this is just, this cost or the additional time frame and reporting just becomes an additional cost to him for the years 6 through 10.
Continue.
But he hasn't said he's out if it's a 10-year.
He is not, but
Okay.
he is at the point of weighing all of his costs.
Okay, understandable.
We move forward.
Further questions for Mr. McMartin at this time? Alderman Patagula.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'm trying to understand what the practical implications are in terms of a 5-year versus a 10-year term. Could you kind of elaborate on that, John? So far, I've just heard you say that it would make competition a little bit more difficult for us in terms of the other cities in the state. Is there more to that, or are there some other things that would a longer term would affect?
I think that was my opening salvo on the follow-on discussion that we'll need to have on 5 versus 10 years if you set, when you start talking about setting a policy for future business improvements agreements, Alderman Padragula, not necessarily for tonight and for what's going on with this particular one.
I guess the other question I had in thinking about this is that would we not have the freedom later on to alter the terms if someone came to us and has made a good faith effort to make one of these things go, and through no fault of their own something happens like the pandemic or war with China, either a trade war or a physical war, which disrupts trade internationally and the economy. If someone comes to us and says, look, I've tried to make a good faith effort, but things have just really changed, would we not have the opportunity to alter the terms of the agreement?
Yes, excuse me for running and grabbing the water, but yes, I could foresee that occurring, Alderman Padragula. But just as the city manager indicated, you want to have an agreement that you know what you're getting into so that at the end of the agreement you don't have issues. I think that uncertainty over the top when a 5-year agreement returns on your investment at a substantial rate, that the owner or the operator sees that as a onerous provision.
Any further questions,
Thank you.
Alderman Patagula?
No, thank you.
Further questions for Mr. McMartin at this time? Any further questions? If we do have any more, John, we'll certainly
Please, I'm not going anyplace.
pull you back up. I would look to the council for a motion or motions plural, and we can start debate. Alderman Pittner.
Mayor, I'll move to approve a business incentive agreement with LPND1 LLC as recommended by staff with a term of 10 years.
Second.
Motion and a second. Alderman Pittner, I need to see if there's a second part to that amendment for the West Brand assignment in
Is it
its
in-
interest lease agreement to LPNDI 1, as our city manager had also said, is the second part of the motion.
Yes, if that's protocol.
Does the second agree?
It's not a separate motion, we're going to combine it all
that's up to the council, but we need clear direction from the council.
Okay.
For those changes are being approved by the
Okay.
council.
We have a motion and a second. That is on the 10-year along with the assignment in the interest of lease. Discussion. Alderman Pittner, you made the motion.
Yeah, I guess I'll start right into it. I want to be a partner with MLK EDC. I understand their position. I'm thankful for all the work that they've put into this point to get this work. At the end of the day, we sit on, as members of Minot City Council, we look out for residents and their taxpayer dollars. 5 years is the lowest standard. I heard that a lot when discussing this with everyone. Again, that's the lowest standard. I couldn't imagine what my dad would have said if I brought home a report card full of C's and I said, well, I'm passing. That's the lowest standard. I feel it's okay to hold ourselves to a higher standard as a council. Unanimous approval. I would hope it was from MLK EDC's board. I appreciate the synergy and the clear direction that they're all headed, and I would hope that they would be unanimous in that. It's the less risk. I get that, and if I were on MLK EDC's board, I would be in favor of a 5-year agreement versus a 10-year agreement. And one of the last points I want to touch on is that we brought Harold in during city manager interviews to be a part of our economic development future and how to drive ourselves forward and how to navigate economic development issues. He, as well as legal and finance, have worked very diligently on this and very cordially with MLK EDC. This is a recommendation. I support staff because I do believe it's what's best for the city of Minot moving forward. So those are my reasons.
Further discussion on the motion. Alderman Evans.
Just getting off that point where I think Mr. Stewart and city staff have really taken the time to make the case for a 10-year and why that's best for the city and our taxpayers. We did, bring a city manager is here to advise the governing body, and economic development is one of Mr. Stewart's specialties, and one of the reasons that this governing body, voted to bring him here. So I take the efforts that he and his staff did to provide the recommendation of 10 years very seriously, and that is why I support 10 years.
Further discussion on the motion. Alderman Patagula.
I have mixed feelings on this. I certainly know and respect and trust John and the people he represents with the chamber and now MLK EDC. I certainly recognize, as Paul said, all they've put into this in terms of their labor, their hard work, their motivation. So I'm kind of torn between two different sets of people I respect. As Carrie said, we hired our current city manager to a significant extent because of his expertise in what's going on in the field, and specifically his expertise in economic development. And if he and the economic development team say, hey, look, this is the common industry practice, this is what you need to be paying attention to, I really feel an obligation to listen to them, and I don't have any reason to kind of overturn their recommendation or to think that I shouldn't accept it. There's no persuasive reason. The one thing that does make me pause is this issue of competitiveness. And I don't know that we have the information at this point definitively to know what the deals that other cities are striking and what their standards are. I've been reading the Herald lately, and Grand Forks is trying to attract some huge businesses, some controversial steps that they're taking. So I guess one thing I would recommend, and I'm not sure I'd want to go out on the limb like they're going out, their council's going out on but I'd suggest maybe that the city staff talk through League of Cities or other channels with their counterparts in other cities and get a sense of what those practices are in Fargo and Grand Forks and West Fargo and Bismarck. It'd be nice if we didn't compete against each other. There will be some of that. I think that's a reality. But it'd be nice if we had a common kind of framework, at least in terms of trying to attract out-of-state businesses. I think for me, there are a couple other considerations that are really important. The first is that this is a private-public partnership, or PP3 kind of activity. And we've had historically some real problems with those in this city. We still have the fiasco with the parking ramps that hasn't been fully resolved. We got an award, but that's been appealed, so that's not settled. That before Mr. Stewart came, I'm not sure he's aware of how much animosity that aroused and how much concern on the part of the public in terms of being the citizens not being getting a fair deal and actually, I think, being ripped off. That was the common feeling among people I talked with. So I think there's still a little bit of trust to restore in that area. So I think, as Paul was saying, we have an obligation not just to one particular group, the group of fellow business people. I'm a small business owner. I never asked for any money from the city or the state and don't intend to, but I guess I could have if I'd been a better businessman. Perhaps I should have. But I think we do have to look at our obligation to the citizens. In terms of this particular project, the intermodal, I think everybody agrees it's a critical project, not just for the city or the county, but for the entire region and actually the whole state. And I think it has to succeed. One of the problems is it's failed in the past. There's litigation that's maybe not fully settled yet. We all had high hopes and things just crashed and burned, as they say, when we first tried to get this project off the ground. I don't think we can take that chance on having it fail again. So despite my mixed feelings about this, I think I have to really support the most prudent, the most conservative position, which would be a 10-year contract to preserve the rights of the taxpayers and the citizens. Again, I'm torn on this. I have mixed feelings, and I respect very much the other side. But I think given the history and our need to be very scrupulous in protecting the interests of the citizens, I think I need to go with the staff recommendation on this.
Alderwoman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too am very torn. I feel at times when we have to make decisions up here, we're making decisions just based on recommendations from people that we trust. And we're getting 2 recommendations from people that I trust very much. I don't have a background in economic development, and so I have to base my decision on the information that I am given. Had this decision, come before us in 2019 and we hadn't just gone through a pandemic, I think I would have been more comfortable with 10 years. But we've seen in a short amount of time how much things can change. And 10 years seems like a long time. As Alderman Padragula referenced, things change a lot in 10 years. And for this particular project, I feel comfortable with 5 years. I'm not saying that that's the guidance that I want to give city staff in all of our projects, because I think that there will be many times that 10 years or 15 or 20, as Mr. Stewart alluded to, would probably be the most beneficial. I do feel comfortable with 5 years on this project.
Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of council, I guess I'll chime in and agree with both Alderman Padragula and Alderwoman Olson that I'm a little torn on this one. But I think there's a couple of things that I kind of am thinking about. One is that the state statute is what it is for a reason. That 5-year number is there in state law to provide some guidance. And certainly in this case, if we went with 5 years or some number between 5 and 10, we would be in compliance with that. Secondly, I think that each of these kinds of projects that may come to us has to be considered on their own merit and in their own circumstance. And there may very well be things where we wouldn't want to do it for any less than 10 years. But I think that in this case, because of all of the distance that we've come from the very beginning of the intermodal port through the history that Mr. McMartin outlined and essentially rescuing this very important community asset, I think I would be willing to to accept 5 years on this one. And so, you know, that's kind of where I've ended up. And I, you know, I would, you know, hope that maybe we could come to some either compromise on a number lower than 10 or go with the 5-year number.
Alderman Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, I think this is, for me, listening to both sides, just as it's been said that the city manager came to us, we brought him on board because of his experience in economic development. I still don't want to downplay the efforts and the experience of our economic development team that we have here in Minot, that we've built here in Minot. I think they've done their homework. I believe, in my opinion, that if we approve a 5-year plan, the wages don't stop at 5 years and 1 day. They're going to keep going, and it's going to prove to be it's going to be there. It just doesn't stop. And I think the bottom line is we've got an opportunity here to send a strong message to business that we're here to work for them. We want to bring business in. We've got 2 state agencies that wrote, you couldn't say it any stronger than what they said. And I'm going to go with the 5 years. And I think this is an opportunity. You know, it's one of the things that we also have, you know, yes, Harold, you had a good presentation, Mr. Stewart, you had a great presentation, but when things come to a vote, we're not going to agree on everything. And I think that's a benefit of the individuality of the council. So I'm going to go with the 5 years.
Sitting on the MADC board myself and listening to a lot of the discussions that have taken place, had many back and forths with a lot of the folks on MADC on the 10 and 5 year, and discussions on the time and the place for the 5 and the 10 year, and looking at individual businesses that have had 5 or 10 year or other timeframes for business incentive agreements, and then also comparative to some of the other communities around North Dakota, and very well being that a lot of other communities choose the 5 or less than 10 years for a reason, and that is the competitive edge. And we continually talk about being business friendly and competitive. I think that is something that to be taken very deep down at heart. Some of the other folks that have weighed in, we had letters here from James Lamont, who is the commissioner at the Department of Commerce, and also Doug Goring. And for Doug Goring to send in a recommendation and say 5 years as the Commissioner of Agriculture, and right now the base for the port that is out there, the inland port, speaks volumes, because right now that is the regional and the state impact point of agriculture. It's the beginning of what this cyclical thing is going to really create. And it has a significance to agriculture, a significance to Minot as an agricultural hub that also speaks volumes to another point, and that is kind of that benchmark that has been hanging out there for that job creation. And I think economic development folks will tell you one-size-fits-all really isn't always the best practice when it comes to setting benchmarks, especially for something like this, simply because the port doesn't fit into that same paradigm of every job has an X mark for growth. And actually the industry, as it becomes more efficient, actually becomes more technologically driven. Actually, the job creation isn't that benchmark that it's driving on. It's number of containers, it's the number of trucks coming in and out, and it is that exponential growth throughout the region that is impactful. And I said this during some of the MADC meetings, and I think this is something that the state legislature should look at when we talk about measuring economic impact for these BIAs, and it can't be just job growth, because that one-size-fits-all doesn't work. It doesn't work in this scenario, and the economic impact to be realized is much more regional and across the state. And that was also included in some of the some of the PDFs that were attached. We take a look at the supporters, whether it be the state, whether it be our legislators, commissioners here. And then we also take a look at really how far this project itself has come. The reason it's not a one-size-fits-all for this, because it has been an all-out battle to get here with more meetings than I think any one of us could count, and more painstaking discussions. And this is also finding an operator. This is also creating those relationships with ports and trade folks that are out on the coastlines. And then BNSF. BNSF has decided that they want this thing at Minot, North Dakota, and that if it's not here, it's going to end up on a CP line probably somewhere down in southeastern North Dakota. And that has been told to us by numerous industry officials on the CP line as well. I look at this as absolutely an opportunity for the community. I very much appreciate Harold's professionalism and expertise on this one. The background for me is I'm going to support a 5-year simply because this isn't a one-size-fits-all. It has such a regional impact that is going to be felt not only obviously in Minot, but throughout the agriculture industry and then beyond. Now, what wasn't mentioned in a lot of this is the containers that we want coming in down the line. As we see this develop, as it should, is that it absolutely should have some more creation for that tertiary business in that industrial park that is out there. That certainly can't be measured on these metrics, is that tertiary side. So I appreciate all of the discussion on this because it's all valid and it's all important, and it's, I think, all weighed very carefully by each one of us. I feel very strongly that the 5 years, simply because of all of the support and all of the previous items I've mentioned, and I will leave my comments to that. Further discussion on the motion for a 10-year along with the West Brand assigned interest to the LPND1. Final call for discussion on the 10-year. Our city attorney is coming to correct me on a motion.
Mr. Mayor, just for clarification, the second part of the motion, just so I understand correctly, should be a motion to approve the lease amendment conditioned on the assignment to LPND1.
Thank you. Is the motion maker and the second both agreeable?
Yes.
Okay. Everyone is clear on the motions that are before us, or the motion with both components before us. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Ross,
No.
Sitma,
No.
Evans,
Yes.
Janzer,
No.
Olson,
No.
Motion failed. Looking for a new motion. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make the same motion with a term of 5 years.
We have a motion, replacement, or not a replacement motion, a new motion for a 5-year term, and then the amendment to the lease agreement as pointed out by our city attorney, clarified by our city attorney. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Olson. Discussion on the new, on the motion. Any discussion? Final call. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, this is a good thing. The port moving forward and this agreement is a good thing. I think it's better at 10 years. 5 is what the council feels is what's best for the community. I'll support a 5-year agreement. I believe actually, I don't know if I will. I believe there's meat on the bone for citizens, and that's who I answer to is citizens of Minot. I don't answer to anybody that sends letterhead from Bismarck. I'm sorry, I don't. I'm looking out for citizens of Minot, and that's who I answer to. Those are the people that call my phone. And that's what I'm looking for. I don't think it's a bad agreement either way. I don't think 5 years is bad. I don't think 10 years is bad. I think it's beneficial for the community moving forward, and I just want to put that out there.
Final call for discussion. Motion is the 5-year term on the BIA and then the amendment to the lease agreement. Please call the roll.
Janzer,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to the end of our action items. Next is personal appearances. This is an opportunity for anyone to come forward and speak on any item that is or is not our agenda. I would ask that if you come forward that you just state your name and city of residence. Police Chief John Klug. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. There are just a couple points I wanted to make this evening. I'll start with the negative one first. So the COVID impact has hit us in the PD. I've been keeping Mr. Stewart updated with our numbers, but I also wanted to make sure that you were aware of where we're at. As of this afternoon, we have a total of 15 employees that are out with COVID, 17% of our civilian staff, 12% of our sworn staff. I think the important part to know here is that we were already facing some shortages, and this brought our sworn staff overall down to 71%, and our effective strength for our patrol division down to 64%. We've been able to manage that. We haven't gone below any minimums, so we're still managing, taking calls for service, responding to the community needs, just having to pay overtime, having to shift some people around, but we've been able to maintain service to the community. Second thing on the good note is I just wanted to publicly say we are opening up the K-9 donation project. So that was part of when we retired Lois last summer. That happened as the budget was being put in place. So I wanted to make sure that we have a number of community partners that are interested in donating. I want to make sure they know that now that we're in the new year, we're going to start doing that. And we will push more information in the coming days, but just wanted to say that tonight.
Thank you, Chief. High level, what dollar amount approximately is the PD shooting for a benchmark on this?
We kind of broke it down, Mayor. So I guess the total number is 80,000, but that encompasses a car that we weren't accounting for, all the equipment, the K-9 related expenses and the training is about 32,000. The vehicle and equipment is about 46. So,
thank you, sir. Any questions for the chief at this time? Alderman Patagula.
I guess just a comment. First of all, I really appreciate you being out front with us, John, and also the city manager about these kinds of things. I think we take for granted a lot of our municipal services, and we need to know when there are problems. And I think it takes courage to say, look, we're doing the best we can, and that's no ill reflection on your work or the work of your staff, but we're doing the best we can, but we have constraints. I was reading in the forum a few days ago where they're down to, at times, 7 patrol officers for the city of Fargo, which is a lot bigger geographically and population-wise. So I think this is hitting all of the cities in our state. And again, I appreciate your maturity and courage and being upfront with us about this. And I think it's important the public know that we try very, very hard, but there are some constraints we operate against as others do. As for the dog, I'm really glad that we're going to be accelerating our efforts. I've thought for a long time that we need a minimum of 3 dogs to deal with things like them being sick and them retiring and things like that. So I wish you success in that effort. I think it really makes a big difference for the safety of our community. We have that resource available to our human officers.
Thank you.
Any further comments or questions here for Chief? Thank you, sir. One more call for public appearances for any item that is or is not on our agenda. If not, that moves us into the miscellaneous and discussion items. So we have the MAC EDC semi-annual presentation. We have Mr. John McMartin back up here at the podium with us. Good evening once again, sir.
Good evening once again, Mayor and City Council. I think Derek has got some slides. I see them up. So let me get right into this. I'll try not to spend too long on this. You heard a lot of this last week or last meeting. So we've been working, one of the things we're supposed to be doing is attracting private sector jobs. Obviously, in the prior, one of the prior items, we talked about the Logistic Park of North Dakota. We've had 35 full trains in 2021. 8,400 containers were shipped. We've been working on the BIA, and thank you for that, and other agreements. We've got $2 million in the North Dakota Rail Construction Grant. The rail switch was ordered and paid for, and I probably should say thank God it was, because the price of rail has increased fourfold since the time that we ordered that switch. So that's great. The Chrissy Grant is moving forward, and the Chrissy Grant is looking at future needs and business prospects and planning for that entire area, not just the port, but the industrial land north of County Road 12. Additional things that we've been doing and trying to accommodate as the port opened in October of 2019, BNSF let us know that the intermodal or the transloading facility could not continue to operate there. A lot of us scratched our head and didn't understand why until we saw the port in full operation utilizing all 3 tracks. So there is some transloading that's going on. The northern part of the site was not specifically designed for transloading to occur on the tracks that were laid. The 4 tracks that are out there were designed to be able to expeditiously move cars in, move them out, stack, build something to be drawn out onto the main line or back into Gavin Yard to be made part of a train. And so the thought always is somebody was going to buy one of the tracks of ground, we'd set a track over there, and that's where the transloading would occur. But to accommodate 2 of the businesses that were there, La Hoist, I want to continue to drink water, as I'm sure all of you do, and Dan, I think packs a bigger punch than I do, so I don't want to infuriate Dan over not having lime. Just kidding, Dan. And Farstead Oil. You know, we oftentimes hear that everybody's just looking for the new shiny object, meaning the new business. Farstead Oil has been in the community for a long time, and this was integral to their business. We have worked diligently with them trying to find, both companies trying to find a spur line. We will continue to do that because into the future, there will be difficulties out there. As we look at the diverse economy, we talk about the Minot Air Force Base. The task force activities have been in force really since the fall of 1990. Wasn't really known as the task force then. It wasn't really until 91 it became known as Task Force 96. But we continue to do that work. We've done our our nuclear triad symposium. We did one in 2020 that was entirely virtual. The 2021 one was done in September of this year. It was both in-person and virtual. We're going to be laying down the plans for the 2022 symposium again in September. We continue to hear that it's important for somebody other than the national corporations that are involved and the think tanks to be talking about the reasons for the nuclear triad. We have a person in Mark Janser that attends the Chief of Staff of the Air Force Civic Leaders Group. Mark has been doing that, I think, for over 8 years, maybe going on 9 now, and has made a huge mark there. And we believe that that's an important place for Mark. The U.S. Global Strike Command Civic Leaders Program, we have 4 Minot leaders that are members. Mark Recca Kramer, who is in the office, Bruce Christensen, and Randy Burkhart. We respond to the state requests for proposals on businesses. We responded to 5 in 2021, and 2 of them wanted additional information. but have since moved on. Connections through the conferences, we have a potential for a FAM tour in 2022. Mark was at a conference in Chicago that encompassed a number of states and also site selectors from both Minneapolis and Chicago. New businesses, Awa Energy is leasing some land from us. They're going to be providing frac sand out into the Bakken. FedEx ground service that I've talked about before, we didn't directly find the land, but we were able to link FedEx or their site selector and the property owner so that a sale occurred. Minot One Brand, we continue to provide support and work with the city to continue to enhance the One Brand logo and talk about the merits of having less silos around. The New Jobs Training Grant Program through Job Service North Dakota, we've had several businesses on that over the years. Currently, the one business that we're serving in that regard is AGT Foods. The Economic Development Strategic Plan will be hopefully completed by the end of 2022. We're going to be going out with some requests here in the near future. We've got ongoing work on our key initiatives, and those were included in your packet. Ongoing promotion of the city in the area by attending relevant conferences and trade shows. Some of the trade shows thought they were starting back up, and then Omicron has surfaced, and whether it's the trade show cancels or everybody gets concerned about traveling to that particular part of the country, we'll continue to do what we can. Lowest presence online, it's the second year. We appreciate the partnership with the city on that. We've entered 58 commercial buildings, and we've got 21 industrial properties listed. We sometimes find a piece of property that's got a sign on it. We make every effort to call, and sometimes the realtor or the property owner says, thank you, but no thank you. And I guess that's perhaps their right, so we don't always include every single piece you see a sign on. New and current efforts, Startup Minot. Certainly not our program, but we're part of the partnership and coalition that have put that together. Mark Lyman from our office has done a tremendous amount of work on that. Support for entrepreneurs. We've had our first monthly networking event last week. 10-week startup training class. Again, last week was the first one. This week on Thursday will be the second week of the 10 weeks. BR&E, we've set a goal for ourselves to interview 5 businesses a month and report to you. We've got the expanded primary sector list that we're drawing from, and we will sit down with members of different primary sector industries and make sure that we've got the relevant businesses on the list. We did that with the energy sector, and I think we added about 45 businesses. We deleted several, but we continue to look at that. We were involved with the CTE. The organization is growing, and we continue advocating for the member investors that make things possible. What did I do wrong, Derek? Questions?
Wait, you missed a slide. I think.
Did I?
Go back one. There you go.
Okay, we continue to share the monthly board reports, support and screen Magic Fund applications, and part of that includes covering the attorney fees from this side of the house, assist in the contract development. Stevens Welding, which you approved at your last meeting, was the first PACE loan agreement in almost 10 years in Minot. And actually, we did receive some phone calls like from Bank of North Dakota saying, thank you very much. It's nice to be back in Minot with a PACE loan. So And we'll continue the detailed reports to the city council every 6 months. We are, I heard some things at the last council meeting about being glad to hear the different things that we're involved in. I think it was an oversight on our part, but if you start seeing the Chamber EDC communicator in your inbox, we've added all of your emails just to make sure that you are seeing our monthly communication piece. And with that, I think there's time for questions.
Thank you, Mr. McMartin. Questions for John at this time? Alderwoman Evans.
Just a quick question. So are you guys able to track how the engagement people have with Lois? Like, are people, like the world out there, are they looking at it, or?
Yes, they are. Jamie is doing the input, and she's also been trying to produce some reports. The contact person at Lois is taking some of our input because the reports are a little too generic to give us all the information we'd like, quite frankly. And she is pushing the developers and her team within Lois, the person that Jamie deals with, to try to get better reporting for us so we have a better understanding, not necessarily of who, but where, from where did they look, what were they looking at, and why, and did they come back multiple times? So we are working to get that type of information.
Great.
Any other questions for Mr. McMartin at this time? Alderman Patagula.
Just a comment. I guess, John, I want to thank you for the detailed report that you presented here and what you submitted earlier. I want to particularly kind of single out some of the data you produced in terms of a survey you did of your members and businesses looking at things that improve the business climate and things that got in the way. And it was interesting to me to again have reinforced this idea that quality childcare is a major problem in the city, as is labor workforce availability throughout the state in general. But it was nice to see that ranking. I think we're moving toward more of a data-based governance model, both on the council and certainly in conjunction with your organization. It's nice to see that it isn't just our subjective impressions. It's actually some data on what people feel and how they see the situation. So in general, I'm very pleased with what you're doing. I'm pleased with the closer relationship between MADC, EC, RC, whatever, and the city. And I have continued hopes for even closer cooperation and better results. I'm really pleased and impressed.
Thank you, Alderman Padragula. And my slides didn't really cover it. I think there is a 3-page summary in there, Brecca? Yep, on BR&E. And that truly is from the businesses that we've interviewed over the last 6 months. And that report was one of the reasons we wanted to push to a January and a July reporting time frame, and we'll probably be looking at doing that in the second meeting of both of those months as we move forward.
And you did forget to mention that Chamber EDC is also providing a little bit of support for State of the City coming up next month.
Yes, we will be.
Any other questions for Mr. McMartin at this time? Alderwoman
If you don't
Evans.
like lunch, talk to the mayor.
Okay.
I just have a comment. I know we talked about this like a year ago about, sort of upping the reporting and transparency of, from folks who are getting money from the taxpayer coffer. So I really appreciate the efforts that you and your staff and board have done to, I think provide us and the residents of Minot with a clear view of all the stuff that you're doing, right? Like, you knew you were doing it, but like it is, the work that you do is important, and we may disagree on terms of, BIAs and things like that, but that does not mean that I don't appreciate the efforts that you and your board and staff make for economic development in the city. And I am so happy to see a really thorough report on all the stuff that you guys are up to.
Well, I appreciate the working relationship I have with all of you and the staff and Harold. I mean, it truly is important. It hasn't been there, and we don't have to look too far to the recent past to remember that. So thank you all very much.
Last call for questions. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Number 11 is liaison reports. Alderwoman Evans, we'll start over on my left.
Nothing. My meetings are all this week.
Okay. Alderwoman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the holidays, it was a little bit late, but I will say that the City, County, School, and Park Liaison Committee met last week on the 13th. Every other year, the city chairs that committee, and it's the city's turn this year. Essentially, we got a pretty in-depth update on the new high school from Dr. Mark Walmer, and a lot of it was reported in the Minot Daily News, but they will have more information coming to us by spring with the name of a school and the mascot, things that people are very interested in. And there also, this body had requested the liaison committee to look into the Minot-wide planning committee, and at both this meeting and our November meeting, we did talk about it, and a recommendation will come to us in February, I believe. The next meeting for the liaison committee is April 21st, so we're always looking for agenda items. And then the last thing was I did attend, which I think sounds kind of funny, but it's the CTE kickoff. We've been talking about CTE for a number of years, but this is just the next step. And we did take action on some of those items tonight, so that's it.
Thank you, Alderwoman Olson. Alderman Patagula.
Thank you. I actually have a lot to report tonight. First of all, the County Planning Commission, in which Carrie and I both serve, has become a little bit more functional lately, and the commissioners have taken the initiative county commissioners, to try to update their ordinances. We're in the very difficult position of having ordinances that are passed, but the staff at the county level have been directed not to enforce, which causes a lot of problems for people who want to develop land in the area. And this makes me appreciate, again, the consistency we have with our city staff. You don't want to be in a position where you have an ordinance out there that you're not enforcing. So it makes me appreciate better, our working here. But we are making some progress there. Hopefully we'll have a draft of a new county zoning code sometime this winter and spring, and then we'll do a road show to bring it out to the citizens of the county for their input. So things are improving there a little bit. In terms of the Commission on Aging, we had a routine meeting this month, nothing major going on. Also attended a meeting of the Emergency Resource Council. Every month we have a briefing by some organization in the community, either public or private, on their emergency preparedness. And this time our meeting was held at the zoo, and the zoo presented very interesting details on how they plan to deal with various sources of emergencies. It was very ironic. This was the day after they had that incident, I think, in Galveston or somewhere down south where a tiger almost killed someone because the person had gotten into their cage area. So we learned that the zoo is very well protected and takes visitor safety very seriously, and also is very concerned about the welfare of the animals. So it was very nice to hear. The next group I serve on is the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee, which just had its first meeting a month or so ago. We're undertaking a revision of the comprehensive plan for the city, something that should be done every 5 to 10 years. Right now, our consultants are starting the process of getting systematic input from the community and planning various focus groups. They are also bringing up a website which will be linked to our website and vice versa. The current zoning code and planning code, comprehensive plan, is being reviewed by them and will be presented to us at our next meeting. I think it was a week from this coming Friday. So there's movement there. It's good working with a professional consultant in the comprehensive plan preparation area, and they are being very effective. And the steering committee is broadly constituted. A lot of different individuals and groups are represented there. And I think we'll have a very good process coming out of that and good recommendations. So citizens should be aware of that if they want to have input on the future of the community, where land will be developed, how it will be developed, what use it will be put to, they'll have plenty of opportunity fairly quickly. The last group I serve on and act as liaison to is the Greenway Ecological Restoration Committee. We had a meeting today. Plans are moving ahead to figure out how to make best use of the greenway that is being developed now with the flood plan and the flood protection efforts. This involves NDR funding, which makes things very complicated in terms of the federal logistics and regulations. The two things I think for the importance of the council that are coming out of there, or for the relevance of the council, are that it was again brought up that we'll have all this land by the river, and we have some money to plan how it'll be used and to do some construction of basic projects. But we're going to need to maintain and operate this on an ongoing basis forever. So that's going to take some funding. And we're going to need to figure out some structure as to how that'll be handled. And I think that's where the liaison committee can be very helpful. The park board will be actively managing many of these facilities. It'll probably remain as city land. The schools may even have some involvement. So a lot of the organizations, a lot of the governments will be involved in that, and we need to figure out how to do that. The other thing is that it sounds like we're going to be needing some sort of oversight or governance or policy-setting group in terms of how these lands will be used. What's happening is the Souris River Joint Board is getting lots of feedback and lots of lobbying in terms of citizens proposing various projects. I guess one of them is a camping ground, another would be an orchard. These sound very good, but Souris River Joint Board isn't tasked with that. It's tasked with protecting the community from floods. And I think there is an unmet need here that we'll have to develop some sort of mechanism to oversee and plan for the development of these areas, along with, as I said earlier, the funding for that. It's kind of like with flood protection. I think Dan can tell us that despite all the millions of dollars we're getting from the federal and state governments, we still have to operate and maintain this thing. And that's a significant drain on us and the Minot taxpayer. So that's something that maybe the liaison committee can look at, is setting up some sort of a structure to make sure that the development of the floodways and the greenways is carried out in a good fashion. We found out that in Grand Forks, for example, they tried to levy a monthly surcharge on utility fees to help pay for that. So that's something we're going to have to start looking at, is how do we take care of all this green land that will be developed. So that committee is making some really good progress. As I said before, the Audubon Society has some money and expertise to contribute, and there are various other groups in the community that are coming forward with ideas and hopes for that. So that'll be an exciting thing that'll start producing benefits to the whole community. But again, we're going to have to look at how we're going to be funding this and making sure that it proceeds in the fashion that we think is best for the community. So that's an update on what I've been involved with.
Thank you, Alderman Pontagula. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got nothing. My committees meet this week.
Okay. Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was present at the liaison committee along with Alderwoman Olson. She very modestly failed to mention that she was elected as the chair of that group for this coming year. So she took over the reins with much excitement, and we'll look forward to what the future brings in that regard. Thank you. Alderman Ross.
Usually you get elected chair when you miss a meeting, right? Congratulations. The Zoning Ordinance and Steering Committee met in just last week. We discussed and approved 20 minor changes as part of the annual cleanup, and we will have we'll have that list of changes in front of the Planning Commission 1st of March. That's my report.
Thank you. Good many meetings, MADC, we already took care of that. Good many other meetings that have been taking place. But just to put on also the radar coming up for the State of the City in February, I'll talk more about that at our next regular meeting. Little change of venue, we're going to do it over the lunch hour and keep it down to an hour and try to transition back in person, as last year it was virtual. So we're going to make sure Omicron continues to not hinder us from doing that, and we'll keep moving forward. So outside of that, that's all I have to report. Anything else for the good of the order today? Just like to mention and thank you to the street crews. Especially after today with all the wind, it's going to be a bugger to keep those streets open. Quick reminder to folks with mailboxes, private mailboxes, it is your responsibility to keep those accesses clear. And for other questions on that, of course, we can talk to staff on street crews. But no, appreciate all the work, especially over the holidays and overnights on that. So with that, we are set for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Pittner, second by Alderman Ross. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.